introduction. So we'll hand over to you. Make sure if you've got questions for Guy, you put them in the chat and we'll be making sure we get to them towards the end of your session. But over to you, Guy. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to hearing you talk.
Brilliant. Hey, thank you so much. And what a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate that. Look, I'm really honored to be one of the speakers kicking off the PMO Global Conference. So a really warm welcome to all of you from wherever in the world you're joining us. Thanks for coming along for the session and getting into this. So look, quickly up, who am I? Look, I'm Guy Thorpe. I'm the Director of Value Key Consulting. We're based here in Auckland, New Zealand. And look, we specialize in projects, programs, and portfolio management. And look, we've got a special place in our heart for PMOs. I've pretty much spent my whole working career in and around project management and in PMOs, both working here in New Zealand and then also within UK as well. I'm also really an active content creator on LinkedIn and post about all things project management and PMOs. So if you're not already connected with me, please, after the session, send me a connection request. I'd love to have you as part of our network so we can share thoughts and ideas around project management. Brilliant. So look, let's get into it. So I like to remind ourselves that, at the moment we're at a stage where the world seems obsessed with artificial intelligence. Can't look too far without coming across an article or a conversation around that. I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot as part of this conference. And it seems like our profession's consumed with what is the disruption that artificial intelligence is going to have on our profession. But I'd like to remind ourselves that projects are humanistic endeavors. Like at the heart of it, it's around people working together. So I want to make sure that as we look at the strides that we're creating in technology, particularly around artificial intelligence, that we also look at it in the vein of the humanistic elements as well, around how we're developing people as part of that. And so look, in that vein, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is project teams being given the best opportunity for success. And that comes with having a committed and capable project sponsor being able to support that team. So, like any good presentation, I'm going to begin with presenting you a compelling case for change. And I'm going to try and persuade you to think about how might we build effective project sponsors in the future in a different way. And you don't actually have to look far to see the flames or the smoke from the bonfires of money that's been wasted globally around poor project execution or failed transformations. Look, you just simply need to punch into Google real quickly and you can see the endless number of headlines that pop up, kind of attention-grabbing pieces that sort of want your attention around it. But what it does is it indicates that there's room for improvement in our profession. There's something that we need to work on to be able to shift the dial here. And these sort of headlines really gnaw away at me as a project professional. It's the kind of stuff that keeps me awake at night. What I'm concerned about is how is it with our ever-deepening kind of knowledge base that we're developing around project management and PMOs and that capability, that we're really struggling to shift the dial on the project success rates that we've got. If you look back, we've barely managed to shift that dial in sort of the last 10 to 15 years. And it got me thinking, what are we doing here? Maybe we need to think about the problem in a slightly different way. So I came across this story that I wanted to share with you, which I think is really enlightening. So let me talk to you about it a little bit. So a policeman sees a drunk man searching for something underneath the streetlight. He asks the drunk, what has he lost? The drunk says he's lost his keys. So both the policeman and the drunk start to look under the streetlight together. After a few minutes, the policeman asks if he's sure that he's lost them here. And the drunk replies, no, I lost them in the park. The policeman says, why are we searching here? And the drunk replies, but this is where the light is. And I think that's a really illuminating story. It's actually called the streetlight effect. And it's an observational bias that we have as human beings. It means that we tend to look for solutions where they're easiestly found. And I think in project management, we have a tendency to look in the same places over and over again for solutions to these problems, particularly around our success rates or how we manage to get that. You think about the billions of dollars globally that we spend on investing in project manager training, or the advancements that we've got in project management tool sets and systems that we've got. They're the best we've ever been. Also, the plethora and the numerous number of delivery methodologies that we have available to us now. If you look about it, I start to wonder, are we simply looking in the wrong places? Are we looking under the street lamp for the solutions to shifting the dial on our project success rates? Should we be looking somewhere else potentially? Cool. So a real quick scroll through social media, and you look at LinkedIn, and you see these kind of posts popping up all the time on a daily basis. And they're kind of classic caricatures or depictions of things, and particularly around project sponsors. I see this one pop up a lot. You see the classic, the rhino. They're really here and name only. And we see that a lot with sometimes sponsors, that they're really busy, but they put their name to sponsoring a project, but they're really here. You talk about the wolf, they're classically busy. They're working on the latest fire. They're never available to actually be able to work with you on things as well. Also, you look at hippos. It's that highest paid person's opinion, the classic that you get when you get into a meeting, and that person's default opinion is the one that we run with. And then for me is that amusing as these posts are, and the kind of the what they're looking at and the representation that we have around sponsors and things is actually sometimes this stuff resonates with us because it's what we're seeing in our own organizations. But they underline an underlying problem that we've got. And the problem is that are we setting our sponsors up successfully? And are we getting the right kind of sponsors that we need to be successful in sponsoring our projects? I came across this study by ProSci, which is done in 2020. And what it shows is actually there's a direct correlation between a sponsor's effectiveness and a project meeting its objectives. And what they came up with is that 73% of respondents said that with an extremely effective sponsor, they met or exceeded their objectives. And if you compare that to 29% of projects that had an extremely ineffective sponsor, they failed to meet their objectives. This really creates that direct connection and correlation between a sponsor and a project meeting its objectives moving forward. And I found that was really enlightening. It got me thinking a bit further around what might we be doing here? Where's the correlation? What can we do to push that a little bit further forward? So one day I was chatting with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about qualifications. And we started to talk about, hey, at your organization, what qualifications do your PMs have? And he came out and he was super proud and super, happy about the fact that they only use project managers with formal qualifications in their organization. And so he was very, very proud about that fact. When I asked him the question around, so what about your sponsors? What training have they got? Or what training have they had to have to deliver on projects? And there was this really awkward silence and this pause. And he just came back and said, none. They're not required to actually do any training before they're released onto a project to sponsor it going forward. And again, this started my firing up and thinking, actually, hang on, maybe we're onto something here. What got me thinking is that we have this tendency when we start to think about project sponsors is that because they're senior in nature, because they're probably been in an organization for a period of time, that actually they're natural individuals to start sponsoring projects. But what I start to think about is actually just because you can drive an operational unit or you're a department head or you're head of a particular function doesn't necessarily mean that you've got the skill set to drive a major transformational project or program. We know that the skill sets are different, and actually the process and the capability that individuals need to go through to leading these types of things is different as well. So we need to start to think about it. Just because you're good at driving a business function doesn't necessarily mean that you're set up to deliver a major transformational project or program going forward. So I got a little bit more further thinking about this. And I used, without a massive budget for going up and doing a massive survey like Gartner or potentially PMI might do it, I used the power of social media. So on LinkedIn, I asked the question, does your organization require sponsors to have completed sponsor training? Simple question. Took me back to the conversation I had with my colleague around making sure that PMs had formal qualifications. What about sponsors? What came back was a resounding 95% of sponsors were not required to complete any training. And that, again, was like quite an enlightening piece. Actually, only 4% of them said, yes, they require them to do training, but it's actually never completed. And only 1% said, actually, formal training is mandatory in our organization before a sponsor can be released and let go and running a major project or program. When I started to talk to sponsors about why might that be, how come you're not required to do any training, or how come you're not required to go through any process or coaching before you're released on a significant project or program, and the common responses I got back kind of fell into sort of 4 major categories. And you might have heard these things when you're talking to the business as well, is that sponsoring a project isn't that different from BAU. Okay, red lights flashing there. You can see that one going off. I'm a senior leader. I know what I'm doing. Whoa, okay, all good. You may be good at running a business department or a functional head, but actually, do you know how to run this $40 million transformational program? Might require a few different skills. The project manager should be doing all of that stuff. Wow, well, that's a warning signals right there. And the classic for me is, I'm too busy running a department to attend any training. And that really kind of, at the heart of it, that's the kind of the classic themes that I get when I talk to sponsors who probably aren't aware of what's required to be an effective sponsor. But it's important that we start to address those things as we start to look at how might we turn the dial on that. So I got to thinking, maybe project sponsors just didn't know what was required for the role. And if they had position descriptions that outline what their role was, or what was required of them, their accountabilities and their responsibilities, surely would be better on track. And I thought maybe most organizations would have a PD. And again, using the power of social media and LinkedIn, put out a survey. Does your organization have a position description for project sponsors? Overriding, no, there isn't a PD for project sponsors. 12% said yes, but it's never used. And 11% said, yes, we use it consistently. Wow, actually, we're starting to get a few things here. Training's not required. There isn't a clear position description. Hey, maybe we're starting to scratch the surface of a couple of problems here that we might need to look at as we move forward. I start to thinking, okay, maybe we're being a little bit hard on sponsors. Now think about it from their perspective. Would you take on a role with huge, significant financial risk, huge accountability, a large team of people to manage, and a high likelihood of failure based on some of the statistics we were looking at earlier? Would you do all of that without a position description? But it seems like that's the overarching yes that we do over and over again. Even a position description would be a really good start point for us to start to look at. But I start to become quite empathetic for project sponsors and saying, hey, maybe we're not helping them enough or setting them up enough for success for them to actually be successful in their role. When talking to project sponsors as well, something that commonly crops up is sponsorship is seen as a bolt-on to the already existing role. And if you talk to a lot of sponsors, what they said is 55% of sponsors said one of their biggest challenges was that they lacked sufficient time and bandwidth to be able to commit to the role. And what we actually see is, unfortunately, most project sponsors have a full-time operational role. They're running a department, they're running a team, they're flat out, they're busy doing this piece. And what tends to happen is that project sponsorship is given on top of their existing role. So they're already working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, running a particular department, they're senior in nature. Then all of a sudden, they're given this gift of project sponsorship on top of that. And it may not be their area of expertise, it may not be something that they're comfortable with, but they're suddenly asked to take that on board as well. And what that means is that project sponsors tend to take on more than they can handle. What we know is that actually to sponsor a project effectively, we need project sponsors committing somewhere between 5 to 20% of their weekly hours to be able to commit to being available to a project team, to being able to address and remove roadblocks as they move forward. You can't do that on top of an existing 40 to 60 hour week as well by adding those number of hours. So I really can become empathetic with project sponsors when they're saying, hey, look, one of our biggest challenges is actually around having the bandwidth and having the capacity to be able to do that role properly. So taking another look at it, so this is a little bit further when we're digging around the ProSci. And what ProSci came up with is when we're looking at project sponsor challenges, these are the key things that cropped up for them. As we mentioned before, 55% of them said, hey, look, we lack the time or resource to be able to commit to doing the role properly. 36% of them said, look, they misunderstood, the role or the people side of it and how big that was going to be. Classically, 29% were delegated the role. The classic, you're voluntold to sponsor a project and into it you get to step. And 18% were unwilling to take on the role. So a lot of them are actually putting their hands up and going, I don't actually want to take on this role. Maybe I don't have the skill set. Maybe I'm not set up for success in this. If you're asking me to take on a significant financial risk of leading this large piece, and actually the results don't look that good if you look at the statistics of success, why would I want to take that on? 17% said they're at the wrong level, didn't quite have the seniority that they required, or they felt that they were too senior and were too much above it and too difficult to address. 15% they left or replaced, and only 6% said no challenges. So looking at it from a sponsor's perspective is they've got some significant challenges in actually taking on that role and doing it effectively. So what do we do? How do we help them? Who should help them? It's probably a key question. And so to my mind, if it's not the PMO or the EPMO, then who? Who's going to help sponsors get them set up for success in the role and get them everything they need to be able to be successful in delivering the projects, programs, and transformations that our organizations desperately need moving forward? So I believe PMOs play a pivotal role in being able to turn the dial around how we set our sponsors up going forward. I wanted to give you a real quick case study of a client that I worked with. And this client is a public sector health client. They are the fastest growing DHB in New Zealand, and they have over 8,000 staff, servicing a community of around 600,000 people. $1.7 billion in operating cost each year. So not a small healthcare organisation. On average, they have around 250 to 300 projects in their pipeline at any time, ranging everything from facilities and structure through to models of care and healthcare and equipment as well. So a large range of different types of projects in that space. When we started working with them, they had some classic problems. Some of their project sponsors were leading 20 plus projects. And if you harken back to the statement we talked about before around, busy individuals, chief medical officers asking to sponsor projects on top of their existing busy role, this was a really big ask. What tended to happen was that the projects got the less of the time of the individual. We weren't giving, the organization wasn't giving them any training, any support, or any guidance in that space. They were expected to jump from one hat, being a medical professional, to suddenly wearing a project sponsor hat and leading and guiding that project as they move forward. And also, they were getting variable levels of project success and delivery based on that. What we did is we started to look at that and see how might we attack it as part of a larger program of work. So what we did is we looked at creating some dedicated project sponsor training courses. It was dedicated to helping them around how to sponsor a project in their environment, in a healthcare environment. What are the things that they need to do? What does good look like? How to chair a steering committee meeting? All the sort of good things that actually, as a medical professional, they wouldn't have had an opportunity to learn. But this course gave them the skills that they needed. We created scaled project position descriptions as well. That gave them what would it mean to be leading a large transformational program versus actually being a small contained piece of work as well. One of the key things we did is we put a cap on the number of projects that a sponsor could actually sponsor. If you're leading 3 large pieces of work, that's enough. That was enough for a particular sponsor to be able to do on top of their existing day job. So we looked at small, medium, and large projects. We agreed a cap of how many each sponsor could handle at any point in time, and then we redistributed the projects across a different management layer. They did a couple of things. It really pushed the accountability and responsibility to a whole new layer of management to learn around sponsoring projects. And it also freed up the individuals on senior levels to focus more intently on those key projects and give them the time and attention that they needed. We also looked at linking individuals' KPIs to project performance. So no longer was it a disjoint from their current role, it was actually part of what they were doing as well. When we started this program of work, there's a P3M3 assessment that they did. So project, program, and portfolio management maturity assessment, which is a scale of 1 to 5. This organization ranked at a 1.4 at the start. Through a 18-month program of work, which this was, the focus on sponsors plus a range of other things, we managed to turn that dial to 3.1. Now, I'm not saying the sponsor piece was solely responsible for that, but actually getting leaders to acknowledge what it was required to lead a project actually really helped in the change process, because we suddenly had a range of advocates who understood project management a lot better and what it meant to lead projects that enabled us to help change the project culture as we stepped into it as well. So a significant upswing based on introducing a range of some simple changes that helped as well. Cool, so some key takeaways for you. I want you to think about 73% of respondents with extremely effective sponsors met or exceed their objectives compared to 29%. So there is a direct correlation between sponsorship and project success. That can't be ignored. It's something we need to pick up and start to focus on. The majority of sponsors that I've worked with, and actually as part of the surveys that have come through us, the majority of them have never received any formal training on ongoing how to be an effective sponsor. So there's a role that PMOs could start to play around providing coaching, support, a light touch sponsorship training course to support and help individuals. It doesn't have to be a large, week-long course. Work with your busy sponsors and develop something that's fit for purpose. It might be a half day. It might be a self-paced learning style that's available on your PMO intranet site that enables them to dip into content and learn around how to sponsor a project effectively. 55% of sponsors said the biggest challenge was a lack of sufficient time. This is a real one, a difficult one to tackle, but one that's really important for organizations to acknowledge. If you continue to pour more and more projects on top of a busy senior individual, don't expect the quality of your sponsorship to get better. We need to start to tackle that project and go, actually, if we've got significant financial investment in a project being delivered successfully, how might we set the person up who's leading that to be successful? Do we need to remove some of their existing responsibilities to allow them to focus on other things so that they can put their attention into delivering a successful project for the organization? And look, a real simple one. If you can take away anything from this, 70% of our project sponsors don't have a simple position description to outline their accountabilities. One of the things I really encourage project managers to do when they first meet their project sponsor is come with the position description. Have an open conversation around what does a project manager expect from their project sponsor. Walk them through it. Even if you think the individual's senior in nature and has got a lot of experience, that open conversation starts to build a bit of dialogue between project managers and the sponsor and allows you to get clarity on the accountabilities and responsibilities for each of those roles. As PMO leaders and as individuals, we can help facilitate that by providing the resources and the position descriptions that they need to have those upfront conversations. So, as PMO leaders, there are a range of things that we can do here. So I think if we want to start to shift the dial, we need to start to think about things differently. Project sponsorship has been one of those things that's flown under the radar for long enough. If the direct correlation is there between project success and an effective project sponsor, how can we start to bring those together and use that to create a better project success rate for us as a profession going forward? Brilliant. Look, that's me. Thank you so much for that. I'm open up to questions, so happy to talk through any questions that you may have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Guy. That was extremely insightful and very, very interesting. There was a lot of comments coming through in the chat. I'd certainly love the concept of the position description. I think a lot of times we see people placed into roles as project sponsors, but nobody actually tells them, as you pointed out, what they need to do or what that role entails. They just tag it on as if it's something you can do off the side of your desk. So thank you for sharing that. We do have some questions, which I will share. So our first question that's come through from Julie is, as project team members will all have KPIs on their project delivery results, project owners have the benefits in the business cases. What are the hallmarks of an excellent project sponsor? And I've just popped that up on the screen now for everyone to see. So that's a question from Julie.
What are the hallmarks of an excellent project sponsor with respects to the characteristics or with respects to linkages to KPIs?
With respect to linkages to KPIs.
Yeah, look, I think one of the key roles that a sponsor plays is ensuring that a project continues to have strategic alignment, that it's in line with where the organisation wants to go. So one of the things for me is ensuring that a project sponsor continues to advocate and ensure that a project is going to deliver to the organisation's strategy. That's kind of one of those key aspects of it. What we normally like to see as well is that the sponsor's got skin in the game. If their bonus or their remuneration and their KPIs are directly linked to the success of a project, they're far more likely to lean into the success of that project. One of the worst things we see is kind of project sponsors ghosting from the get-go. They kind of turn up for the kickoff session, they disappear, and then they pop up at the end, hoping that that it's been successful. Whereas if they actually have their own personal KPIs tied to the success of the project, they're far more inclined to actually make sure that it's a success and be across it and in the detail with the PM where required.
Amazing. Thank you, Guy. We have another question that's come through. So this one is from Hubert. How to engage sponsors if they only have expectations and their role as a sponsor on paper?
Yeah, this is a great question, right? I mean, and all too often we kind of see that space where it comes back to that image of like Rhino. They're really here in name only, right? And that's that classic image of, well, actually, I've been told to sponsor this project, but I'm not really committed and involved in it. And that's where I go back to as a project manager. If I was stepping into that situation, I would go with the position description and sit down with that project sponsor to start with and have that open conversation and go, hey, look, we haven't worked together. I'm a PM. I'm going to be delivering this piece as my sponsor. I just wanted to run through what I can expect of you and what you can expect of me. Sometimes we forget to start that kind of relationship from the get-go. We kind of assume that everybody is on the same page and everyone understands what they're meant to be doing. But it might feel a little bit clunky, a little bit awkward to start with. But once you've had that conversation and saying, what I need from you as a sponsor is I need you to help remove roadblocks. What I need you to do is when something crops up, when's best to get in touch with you? Can I text you after hours and let you know what's going on? If we're going live, are you available on the weekend to have a chat? Those sorts of things. So establishing your boundaries, establishing your expectations, and letting your sponsor know that this is what's required to be a sponsor right from the get-go sets the relationship off on the right path.
It's a good call out, and realistically, any good project professional should really be including the sponsor in their stakeholder matrix, and therefore figuring out how that stakeholder, being the sponsor, often the most important, who holds a lot of the funding reins, really should be having that conversation up front. So I think it's a really good call out. Is there any advice you can give on what to look for in a sample position description? One of the questions Joanna asked is, what would be in this position description for a sponsor?
Yeah, like what I would really look for is really clear accountabilities and responsibilities. And look, there's a long list of things that we can come up with, but kind of the classic things at the top of my head is making sure that there is the sponsor is accountable for the success of the project, right? So that big A word is a fundamental word that needs to be in any position description. What tends to happen is Sponsors think that they can delegate that accountability to the project manager to deliver the project. It can't. The sponsor is the person who is the single ringable neck. I hate that term, but they are the individual who's accountable for the success of the project. The team is there to support and enable that individual to be successful. So that statement needs to be really, really clear within position descriptions around the accountability and what's required. There's a range of other things as well. So chairing steering committee meetings. All too often we rock up to steering committee meetings and the sponsor will open and go, over to you, PM, and expect them to run the meeting. It's actually the sponsor's accountability and responsibility to chair that meeting. The project manager is there to provide guidance and updates and information and escalation of risks and issues and a range of other things. But actually, steering committee meetings are the sponsor's meeting, and they should be owning that and managing that from the get-go. Sets the tone. That's probably another thing as well, is that the culture. I also say that sponsors cast a long shadow into a project, right? And what I mean by that is they really set the tone for the culture of the project. So if you say things like, hey, look, my door's always open, I'm ready anytime for you to come and talk to me, and then you're never there, or you're never on the other side of the door when we come to talk to you, that sets the culture of, well, actually, they're not true to their words. Whereas actually as a sponsor, if you front up, you're involved, you're engaged, you're available when required, that sets the tone for the project as well. So creating that culture can be embedded into a position description as well. And look, the list goes on and on and on. There's a whole bunch of different things that are in there, but for me, it's really around being accountable, setting the right culture, and then setting your project team up for success.
And just thinking about the fact that, you talked about, education or upskilling project sponsors, how do you recommend organizations or maybe people in the PMO to help maybe a project sponsor who maybe doesn't think that they need any upskilling or education or training? Like, how do you bring them on that journey to show them that, especially if they haven't been in that role before, maybe understand the role? Any advice you could give to us?
Yeah, sure. I think, as we kind of come back to those kind of classic things, I'm too busy, I'm running a department, isn't that the project manager's job? All those kind of classic things that crop up. What I generally try to start with is find a group of advocates that are sponsors who are advocates for the stuff. Build a short form course, take them through that, get them talking about it and the success that comes with that. What you'll find is that those advocates will go, hey, you'll never believe it. We're on this amazing short form course that was provided by the PMO. It was really insightful. I learned a whole bunch of stuff about it. Their peers will hear that and go, oh, actually, maybe I should go on that as well. So rather than trying to use the stick to sort of knock people into shape with it, try and build a cohort and try and build the success of that as you go forward as well. You can then scale that up as you go forward. Some organizations I've worked with start to say, actually, it's like obtaining a driver's license. So if you want to start to sponsor projects going forward, you need to have gone through this course to know how to deliver a project within this organization and how to be successful. It's setting you up for success. It's not trying to tell you how to suck eggs. But we need to get beyond that barrier of thinking that because I'm senior in nature, I know how to deliver projects and programs and transformation.
And I guess that's a really good point in relation to another question that came through from Dayakar about if the sponsor finds no value in what they're doing or repeatedly changing, his or her priority, how does a PM deal with that? So I think you've just given some examples there on how to deal with that, which I think is really good. Have you got a past experience where either you or someone has experienced a very difficult project sponsor and how you went about or they went about addressing that situation?
Yeah, and I think, unfortunately there's a litany of different stories around that space, but I think, one experience I personally had was, that classic sponsor of ghosting you from the get-go. So, early in my career as a project manager working in that space, I was really eager to impress and get going. So met the sponsor to begin with. They're really senior in nature. That was quite scary. I didn't want to tell them how to do their job or how to be a sponsor. They basically checked in at the beginning, said, have you got it? And then disappeared for 6 months. I never saw them again. Every time I sort of would write an email to say, hey, look, I've got a couple of issues here. I need to talk to you. Didn't get a response. So then I started to camp out around the EA's desk, hoping to find them and sort of catch them walking past their EA's desk and have a conversation. Could never land that kind of conversation. Got their mobile number, started texting them, didn't get any replies. And the project got to a point where it started to go from amber to red. And there were some issues that I needed decisions on and I needed progress. And I started to get a little bit frantic around it. And what happened is I actually had a chance passing in the hallway where I walked past the sponsor. And I said to them, hey, look, we've got a real issue here. The project's off track. I need these key decisions. Can you help me? And all of a sudden they had this look of, well, why didn't you tell me? Why haven't you, come and see me? And the whole point of, I've been trying every possible angle I could to do that. And right from the get-go, you've made yourself unavailable. After I'd laid that out for them and started to talk to them about, the things that I'd done to try and get in contact with them, you could see the penny dropping and kind of the light going on. I was fortunate enough that they were able to receive that feedback and take it on board so that we could then sort of turn the relationship around, but then also turn the project around moving forward as well. But it took a really uncomfortable situation and what was quite a challenging conversation for me as a sort of a junior PM to tackle a senior individual and tell them that they're being remiss in their role for actually to be able to get things right and move it forward again.
It's a really good example. I love your comment around the EA desk. We all know that if your executive assistant is your best friend, you get lots of straight beelines to the management desk. So I think that's a good call out. And I think the other thing as well, you probably would agree that we don't want our sponsors to have surprises. So by you going out of your way to try to get in front of them before, whatever decision was needing to be made, you're probably going to be preparing them either for the worst or for the best, depending on what the situation was. So they probably appreciated that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I can work on the basis of trying to over-communicate. When, my sponsor's telling me, hey, you're telling me enough, I kind of think that I'm at the point that I've actually nailed it. We operate with no surprises. You trying to want to get that across to them. But at the same time, sponsors need to be receptive to be able to take that information and actually be available to respond at the same time. Sometimes it takes a little bit of coaching to get them there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just thinking about, the opportunity for projects and obviously PMO professionals, depending on how the organisation is structured, to really help to nurture and uplift those project sponsor. You talk about position description. You talked about some sort of like training. Now, when you talk about training, I mean, are you thinking that we could even have it could be a 1 hour lunch and learn or a similar sort of sessions? It doesn't have to be you've got to send them off to an 8 hour full day training. You're talking about internally consciously built sessions that will help to upskill and educate on project sponsors in that organization.
You got it. Yeah, what you'll find is if you try and push sponsors down an 8 hour, course or a 5-day course, they will never attend. It comes back to that problem of I'm a busy individual, I'm senior in nature, I've got all this. So trying to meet your sponsors where they're at is probably the best way to go. And start small, as you're indicating, start with a lunch and learn session. Encourage people to come along to that. You might then offer, a half-day course. And get some of your advocates to attend that. Brilliant. You might want to film that half-day course and create some online modules around one on how to chair a steering committee meeting effectively, how to make yourself, coach and set the right culture. So all of a sudden, you're creating all these training resources that start to meet sponsors where they're at. So if I'm a busy individual, I might attend a lunch and learn. And then actually, if you refer me on to your intranet site that's got a whole bunch of modules that I can learn at my own pace, brilliant. Suddenly I've got access to all this information that I didn't have before. But we've got to start to get creative as PMO individuals around how do we meet our sponsors where we're at. So rather than expecting them to come to us, we've got to go out and provide opportunities that make it frictionless for them to get their learning up.
Amazing. And the examples you just gave are examples of micro learning. So, incremental learning to just build upon. And I think you said it earlier that by doing that, those sponsors are probably going to see the value of that and then go and speak to other people, their peers, and obviously then keep coming back to that. So I think that's a really good insightful suggestion there as well. Amazing. Well, we're almost at the end of our time, Guy. We've really appreciated having you on the PMO Leader Conference. Is there any closing thoughts or anything you wanted to leave the audience with before we wrap up our session today?
Oh, look, just thank you for having me. Like, I've really enjoyed the experience of talking with you. And look, you've got an amazing conference laid out for the next 18 hours. So I'm going to try and hang in as long as I possibly can, see whether we can do the marathon and do the full 18 hours and see where we go. But you've got a bunch of inspirational content and inspirational speakers there. But I truly believe that as PMO leaders, you occupy an amazing position within an organization. You start to become the heart and the hub for a lot of what goes on within an organization around projects and programs and transformation. And we shouldn't be afraid to use that for the betterment. And look, you know, with all the technological advancements that are coming down the line and all the things that you'll hear about AI and things moving forward, don't forget that, you know, project management, you know, product management is both an art and a science. The science around the technology and the tools, the art is really the humanistic element that is part of it. And as PMOs, we've got to lean into that humanistic element and make sure we're building capability and skills that will enable us to move on to the future successfully as well.
Amazing. That's really well said. And I know it took a bit of time to get you on here. We wanted you last year, so we're really glad that you joined us. So thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. This will be available for anyone to access after the session as well. Again, thanks. Thank you, Guy, on behalf of everyone for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, everybody. See ya.
Thank you. For those of you that are just finishing up this session with us with Guy, our next session is starting in a few minutes' time, and we have a panel continuing the theme of stakeholders, stakeholder success demystified, expert insights, and practical approaches from 4 key speakers. So if you'd like to head on over to that session, we will be starting that in a couple of minutes' time. Thank you again to Guy.